Hi, everybody. My name is Jimmy Carroll. I'm the Vice President of Operations at Tech B2B Marketing, and welcome to this episode of the Manufacturing Matters podcast, where I have the pleasure of being joined by Bryan Powrozek, who's a partner at Wipfli. Bryan, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Jimmy, thanks for having me on.
Of course, yeah, and this is kind of a timely one, right? Because tax season is approaching and I don't have to tell you that, obviously, but so to set the stage a little, I guess you and I met years ago. It was at the A3 Vision Show, I believe, in Boston, or maybe Automate. And at the time, we were discussing the importance of the R&D tax credit for the automation space. And fast forward to now, and public law number 11921, also known as One Big Beautiful Bill, has a number of important tax implications for automation and machining, metalworking, and manufacturing in general. So I guess I'll start by asking, right, like we'll go to all those sections, but the restoration of the immediate R&D expensing in section 174, explain that in kind of like common terms and what it means for companies in automation.
Yeah, no, definitely. And this by far, in my opinion, is one of the bigger provisions that impacts automation companies. And so at a very high level, section 174, that's the code section that allows the deduction of R&D expenses by a company. Prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, taxpayers always had the option of either capitalizing those expenses or immediately expensing them. Typically, immediate expensing is more beneficial to the taxpayer, offsets income in the current year. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, effective in 2022, required that taxpayers begin capitalizing and amortizing those expenses over a 5 or 15-year period. So as you can imagine, a lot of automation companies who were doing research and development activities now had to take expenses that would have ordinarily been deducted in the current year and spread them out over a 5-year period. So it had a real negative cash impact for those companies in 22 and 23 as they were paying taxes on something that they weren't going to see the expense deduction for another 4 years. So that really threw some wrenches into a lot of cash flow planning for automation companies during those years. So with the One Big Beautiful Bill has now restored that to immediate expensing. You still have the option to capitalize, but you can immediately expense those. So a lot of the automation companies now are able to kind of get back to the, kind of the normal cash flow of their operations. And there's also, depending on how the company addresses those previously capitalized amounts. There's a couple different options depending on size and a few other factors. They can either have retroactively, which if they've already, by this point, everybody should have filed their 24 tax returns. They could have retroactively done it on that return, or there's situations where it carries forward into 25 and 26, where now you're getting the benefit of those expenses from prior years flowing into your current year taxes. Which should really just help with cash flow, tax planning, things like that.
Yeah, and in 25 companies went to the A3 Business Forum last month. It seems like it was longer ago, but it was just a few weeks ago, really. And one of the common themes that kind of emerged from there was in 2025, companies faced a lot of uncertainty, largely because of tariffs, right? They weren't really sure what to do next with tariffs, and they kind of held things tight to the chest. And for 26, companies are looking outward and feeling optimistic, thinking like maybe this tariff hangover is lifting a little bit. One way or the other, you have to get past that. So, having just another thing to worry about, like you're talking about here, is a challenge. So, but now that this is in place, what should companies be doing? And how does it differ between like small, medium, large enterprises? Do things change based on size?
Sure. No, that's a great question. And it's interesting that you kind of led with that uncertainty piece. And I'll get on my soapbox for one quick second, and then I'll get back into the tacticals.
Please do.
But it's interesting. We hear that a lot, right? It's like, oh, it's this tariff issue, or it's supply chain issues during COVID or COVID itself, and when I try to talk to business owners, I try and get them to pivot that mindset of, hey, this isn't a new world of uncertainty, right? Uncertainty has been with us for decades. Now, the way that uncertainty presents itself is going to change. And so clearly building a business that's agile and can respond to those changes. I live in Metro Detroit. I work with a lot of automotive companies. This whole, are we going electric? Are we not going electric? Back and forth on the seesaw, has thrown a lot of companies, through quite a planning, roller coaster. But that's the world we're going to live in now, and it's not going to change. So if you adapt to a mindset of, well, it's not just till we get through this tariff thing, because there's going to be something else after that. So, so really, when I use that thought process and that structure of being agile, right, and doing the right things based on the information you have in front of you, but having a plan that can adapt and change to that. So as specifically as that relates to tax, planning. Clearly now, taxpayers, business owners don't have to worry about, hey, if I do this R&D project, it's now going to drive this huge. So not only am I laying out cash to do the R&D, but I'm going to lay out extra cash for my taxes. So that piece is off the table now. So that's good. Companies can really forecast better how their cash flow is going to go. But it also creates the opportunity. There were a lot of clients or companies, again, right or wrong, I'm not judging their motivations, but who avoided the R&D tax credit, because if you claim the R&D tax credit, you were by default raising your hand and saying, I have R&D expenses and therefore need to capitalize and amortize. So now that piece has gone away, companies who aren't currently claiming the credit but are performing research activities should give that some consideration, because that's an easy way to free up some additional cash flow to reinvest in your business. You talked about large versus medium versus small. There's some subtle nuances to kind of how the strategy changes based on size, but usually it's just you're bigger, you're getting bigger deductions, right? You're profit, you're a larger company, so your R&D spend is going to be higher, therefore your credit could be higher. So really, it's working with an advisor. Being an entrepreneur, a business owner, business leader is hard enough without trying to learn everything else that goes on around a business. So having a good advisor who can take you through this and say, hey, I see your goal is this. Here's how you best structure or set up your tax position to accomplish those objectives. And so R&D can be one piece of that. I know in our planning here we talked about some of the depreciation changes in the law. That's another piece that can come into understanding how your operational strategy can potentially impact your tax strategy.
And I'm realizing, Bryan, this is my fault, that I neglected to ask you to kind of introduce your company at the beginning, and obviously, like in the description and everything of this podcast, it'll be clear. But maybe if we could just take a second to do that, it would give a little bit additional context.
Sure. So Wipfli is a top 20 accounting and advisory firm. So I think we tend to lead with the accounting work. So we're talking a lot about taxes here, but are kind of at our core. We're an accounting firm that, as we've grown, has added on the advisory capabilities that our clients need. I personally sit within our manufacturing, retail, and distribution practice. So I work with a lot of manufacturers, system integrators, automation companies, things like that, and really trying to help take what we know about running a successful business and help the business owners or the leaders then apply that, within their own facts and circumstances. So that's, our core competency, where we bring the most value is the small to mid-size privately held businesses. We do work with some larger ones, and that's not to say we can't play there, but I feel like, at least in my practice and the companies I work with, getting companies in that 10 to 25 up to, a couple $100 million in revenue. There's a lot of levers we can pull and help them, kind of move forward to get to that next step in growth.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
I want to ask kind of the same question I asked you before in terms of tell us what it is, what it means for companies automation in automation with regards to the reinstatement of 100% bonus depreciation.
Yep. Sure. And when you think about that, really any of these things, the R&D tax credit, bonus depreciation, and the several other provisions we'll kind of touch on here. The Congress is trying to incentivize a behavior, right? So the behavior, think about your own personal. If you own a home and you can deduct the mortgage interest, that's because they want to incentivize home ownership. So similarly here with the depreciation, they're trying to give manufacturers, really give any business owner, but thinking in the manufacturing context, an incentive to invest in new equipment, new capacity, new capabilities, et cetera. So what bonus depreciation does is essentially allows you to deduct the entire value of a new asset in the first year, as opposed to spreading it out over 3, 5, 7 years, depending on what the depreciation guidelines say. So in practice, it is now just a kind of more of a cash flow management tool, right? If I know if I'm going to spend this money this year, I'm going to see the real tax benefit this year versus over the depreciable life. So again, part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it was phasing out bonus depreciation. The percentages was kind of continuing to drop down. But now this restores it back up to 100% on qualifying assets. There's always some rules around what qualifies, what doesn't. But if an asset qualifies for that treatment, you can deduct the entire value in the first year, which should help with cash flow and tax planning.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back. I want to circle back a little bit to when I was talking about like the idea that a lot of companies are feeling optimistic towards 2026, and some of the prognostications for the year are positive, right? Yep. Expected growth in robot adoption, mobile robot adoption, machine vision, all these other enabling technologies within the automation space. But we also talked a lot about some major investments in the United States in manufacturing and production, kind of reshoring and this whole like resurgence of U.S. manufacturing. Do you feel like these tax implications we're talking about today, and I know there's a couple more we'll get to, but do you think these will have a positive impact on that and maybe get some of these smaller companies to start rethinking their strategy?
Oh, without a doubt. That is, I think a lot of the provisions that were in the One Big Beautiful Bill are geared towards that. And this isn't new to the Trump administration, right? The Biden administration wanted to build up the manufacturing base here in the U.S. And I think that for various reasons, folks are seeing the importance of bringing, if it's not reshoring, it's nearshoring. Get it to Mexico, get it to Canada. Yep. But yeah, I think a lot of the lessons learned over the last 5 years has said, hey, we were the global supply chain, while it offers some benefits, it also has some drawbacks as well. And I'll leave that to other people to debate those pros and cons. But a lot of these provisions really do help support that idea of expanding U.S. R&D capabilities, expanding U.S. manufacturing capabilities. So you think about that. We talked about the bonus depreciation. So if you're a manufacturer and you're looking at this and saying, gosh, I see this big opportunity here for me in 26, but I'm going to need more. I'm going to need more press capacity. I'm going to need more molding capacity, whatever it might be. Now you have a motivation to make those investments in the fixed assets you're going to need. Similarly, I mentioned reshoring or nearshoring, but there's a new provision within the bill that is trying to incentivize the production of new manufacturing facilities. So historically, if you buy a building, build a building, whatever it might be, that would become a long-term asset, right? So now you're depreciating that over 39 years, at least the building piece of it, not the land. But so you're really spreading out the time that you're getting to deduct that. Well, now if it's qualified production property, and again, nothing's simple in the tax code. There's always lots of different rules and qualifiers to determine what meets the criteria as qualified production property. But if it is qualified production property, you can get 100% of that depreciation up front. So now you think about that. That's helping near-term cash flowing. So you're spending all this money to build the building and get it ready for use. And now you're not going to have to worry about paying tax on any profits as you're getting that building up and running and filling it up and doing those things. So it shifts around your tax bill. Now 39 years from now, you've depreciated the building and you're not going to have the tax benefit. But the thought being, you're helping now and giving an incentive to put the facility in place now, and then the company can deal with those ramifications in the future. So yeah, that piece in particular on the qualified production property is really geared towards getting companies to either expand capabilities in the U.S., open new capabilities in the U.S., whatever it might be. But that qualified production property element will really help spur some of that behavior.
I mean, yeah, all this stuff just seems sort of enormously positive for the manufacturing space and for businesses like yours too. But it's like it's going to help a range of different companies, and I'm like kind of what you're thinking. I'm picturing a lot of these like smaller to medium sized companies that are like maybe have been averse to big capital investments in the past, now saying, well, it's a little bit easier now in some ways anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And even, I don't like getting too far in the weeds on some of these, because it's, ultimately that's what, when I talk with clients, I'm like, that's what you pay me for. Like, you don't need to be the expert on the tax law. We have the team that figures that out. But there's another element of the bill that deals with the interest deductions. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act put an interest limitation in place on how much interest you could deduct during the year. That's been refigured to allow more interest to be deductible before you hit that limitation. So to your point, if I'm a business owner and I'm considering going out and building a building or buying a piece of equipment and I'm going to finance it, if I knew on the back end I wasn't going to get the full expense, be able to deduct the full amount of that interest because of this limitation, well, now there's a little bit less motivation to do it, versus now that interest limitation is higher. So it should encourage businesses and companies to take on, some financing if that's what's needed to keep their plans moving forward. So again, yeah, really, really friendly towards investment, growing capacity, which, hopefully as the theory goes, right? If I create capacity, I can hire people, and now, I'm creating jobs, I'm doing all these other things, so we're pretty excited about what we're seeing. I know my clients are excited about it. They're hearing a lot of kind of what you talked about. I think we've all weathered the tariff uncertainty. Things are still changing today, as it goes along, but I think we'll see less of that throughout this year. So it gives a little more confidence in planning for what comes next.
Yeah. And to your point, like uncertainty from tariffs, it's like, well, even if we get past that, what's next, right? It's like in the last 5 or 6 years, like you said, it's been COVID, it's been labor. The labor shortage is not going away. There's political uncertainties, and there's always going to be something. So you kind of have to adjust to that and move on and adapt. And that's sort of, seems to be everybody's mindset now, which is a positive one, right?
Oh yeah. And that's where I tie back to this, adapting your business to rely on, to being agile, right? And being able to adjust these things. I always give the example. I have a client here that is, again, heavily automotive, heavily involved in die casting. And so when Biden was elected the first time, the world was ending because everything was going to go EV, and his customers were all making internal combustion engine components, and it's the end of the world. Well, through that, they found, well, a lot of the EVs were going to rely on die cast parts to accommodate weight and other things. So now he's getting all these new opportunities to go that way. And then as this election was approaching, he's like, oh, if Trump gets elected, then all the EV stuff's going to go away. And it's like, well, yeah, it might. And that's where you can't tie yourself to a government program or government incentive. I mean, obviously, they're there, and you've got to factor those into your decision-making process. But because things can change now with the stroke of an executive order, don't count on that. Factor it into your strategy, but also be ready to adjust when the next administration comes in, or even us here, right? In the midterm elections, if the Republicans lose control of, one of the houses of Congress, now they're, we're right back to a stalemate, and you're not going to be able to get some of these things through. So you can't let that be the thing that prevents you from achieving your goals as a business owner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of it sounds like, remaining agile and being adaptive to change is one thing that obviously that you're preaching to your clients. And I know you can't get too granular, but what are some things, like if you have one or two or three pieces of high level advice for companies when it comes to taking advantage of these, not taking advantage of, but making sure that, these tax implications that can benefit them? Like, what do you tell them to do? Where do they start?
Yeah. I always like to counsel my clients to first understand their business, right? Understand, what, if you've got multiple product lines, which are the profitable ones, which are the ones that they may not be as profitable, but you still need them because it gets you into a certain market or gets you into a certain customer. So really understand your business first, and then let that, educate some of these other decisions. We talked a lot about some of the tax elements of the one big beautiful bill. So you think about that, and just bonus depreciation, right? I get to take 100% of the deduction now, which means I'm giving up that deduction in the future. So if I'm operating at a certain level of profit, do I really need that deduction this year? Should I defer that? Should I keep the normal depreciation and just get a little bit of expense each year? That all, factors into, kind of the decision on whether these things are done or not. And I think oftentimes these things kind of happen in a vacuum, right? I'm your CPA. You give me your financial information. I go away. I make my decisions on the tax return and kind of present the results to you and explain what I did. But, ultimately you're hoping I'm doing what's best for the business. So making sure you understand where you are, where you want to get to, and then have advisors who are going to have those conversations with you and have you be part of those conversations, not just come in and say, well, I'm the CPA, I know best, this is what you're going to do. Yeah. Because you may have some thought in your head of, hey, I really want to do this, but I don't want to make the capital investment. So I'm going to take that off the table. Well, then you talk to your CPA or some other business advisor, and they say, well, yeah, but you're going to get to deduct that this year, which now frees up this cash. So now you're going to have more money to reinvest back in the business. And maybe it becomes part of a kind of a holistic plan. You can't really, maybe that's more the point I'm trying to get to is, you can't do these things in silos. Something that you do on the operations side will impact the tax side, will impact the human resource side, because maybe then you got to hire people, right? And do we have enough folks in the area that we can hire to fill this need? So, everything needs to work in concert. Otherwise it'll start to fall apart.
Yeah, fair enough. That's really good. I think we've probably talked about some of the major tax implications, but are there other provisions in the bill that companies in manufacturing and automation need to know about, in your opinion?
Yeah. So, we talked about the depreciation stuff. There's another section of depreciation referred to as 179. That's just another way of accelerating depreciation. So you should be confirming if you're doing that, if it makes sense with your tax advisor. The qualified production property for any manufacturer considering an expansion, a new building, anything like that, they should really look into that. That'll will help things. There is for any companies that are pass through in nature, so a partnership, an S corp. There was a provision in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act known as the 199A deduction. It was essentially meant to kind of equalize. They reduced the corporate rate, the C corp tax rate was reduced, so to kind of pass that same benefit along to the individual business owners who the pass throughs, their tax flows through to their personal return. So that was made permanent. So that's a good piece. That takes one question mark off the table of, is this going to be around or not? There were some other things, depending on the location, some renewal of opportunity zone programs and, some other changes to them. So again, depending on the specific geography of where you're located, where you're operating, where you're considering expanding, some of these qualified opportunity zones, add some additional incentives there. Those are all very kind of specific. And so it's not something I can give like a great high level example on, but that's something to look at, and if you know that you're working in an opportunity zone and you're working with the economic development team of that region, they'll probably be able to point you to those types of things. The one that is a little bit, it's a negative, I guess, depending on how you want to look at it. And people may have heard, but a lot of the energy tax credit incentives were being phased out or eliminated as a result of the new bill. So, that is something where, there's a deduction for energy efficient commercial building equipment and things like that. Those projects have to be started by June 30th of this year in order to still claim the value of that credit. So really, if you're looking at those, or if you've been kind of sitting on the sidelines saying, hey, maybe we could take advantage of this, you really got to act fast to make sure you can take advantage of that. Yeah, I think those would be some of the main ones that I can think of just kind of off the top of my head.
Yeah, that last bit was probably very useful for a lot of people. Are there any other sort of, not deadlines, but things that people need, or deadlines, I guess, that people need to know about besides the obvious ones when it comes to this tax season?
I think probably one of the biggest ones, if you know that your business was subject to the Section 174 capitalization in prior years, and you haven't, by this point, if you haven't had a conversation with your tax preparer about that, really getting in front of them to understand how you're going to remediate that, right? There's still the ability to go back and amend, but at this point, you're probably doing this prospectively. So, really understanding from them, because there's still, even with that, you can take all of the remaining capitalized expenses as a deduction in 25. You can spread it out over 25 and 26. A lot of that comes back to, hey, what are we projecting for our 25 taxes versus our 26 taxes? Does it make sense to take it now or take it now and later? So really, and I would hope by this point, most business owners and leadership teams have had this kind of outreach from their tax advisor. If you haven't, because of the enormity of the bill and what it did to overhaul the tax code, make sure you're getting in front of them and understanding how they're seeing this bill, how it impacts your business, and how your business can take advantage of it. Because I mean that's the other. It's funny. I hear that within my clients. That there aren't enough people. Same's probably true in your profession. Same's true in our profession, right? There's more work than there is people to do it. So I don't think it's negligence on the provider's part. I think it's just, there's more work. And when something of this, monumental change comes into place, sometimes things fall through the cracks and clients don't get the outreach that they deserve. So if you haven't heard from your advisor, definitely reach out and ask, what this means for you, and are there provisions, like the qualified production property or the opportunity zones that your company could take advantage of based on things that you're trying to accomplish, this year and in coming years.
I mean, I think right there you kind of boiled down the entire discussion, right? Is like make sure that you're aware of all these things, make sure you're taking advantage, and just staying up to date, right?
Yeah, and I would say that's true of, whether you're talking about your CPA, your attorney, your banker, like whoever it might be, like the days of us just being the compliance team are over, right? If I'm not kind of a part of your team and helping you with planning and providing those things, there's plenty of other providers out there that are going to be willing to do that. So make sure that you've got that right team assembled around you that can, I like to tell my clients, I work with a lot of system integrators. I'm like, you would not call me to design your control system, right? I'm not the guy. So you focus on the control system. I'll focus on the tax and finance and accounting side of your business, and help you build, something that gets to where you want to be. So yeah, it's fun. I enjoy it a lot, but it definitely gets challenging at times.
Well, yeah, especially with big changes like this one.
Yep.
I think, I was going to ask you a few things. We kind of covered them organically, though, like with reshoring and the impact on U.S. manufacturing. But I guess, Bryan, is there anything else we haven't talked about that you feel like you'd want to get out there?
I think we hit a lot of the stuff on the bill. I mean, I'd probably just go back to something I commented on earlier. And I think that, I see this a lot from the small manufacturing company, as they're progressing and growing, really get to know your business and take a look at it through a critical lens, right? Because that's ultimately, how you're going to be able to judge if the new process you implement is working, if the new technology you implement is working, if the new customer segment you're going after is working, is really starting with understanding your business and what makes it work, what you do best, and then using that as the center point to kind of evaluate everything else. And so if you don't have that perspective, and I know, believe me, I work with enough entrepreneurs to know that they go off on their own and they've got this great widget that they know how to design and sell. And then next thing you know, they're getting orders from everywhere and they're just trying to keep themselves, afloat and take advantage of the opportunity in front of them. But it cannot be undersold, the importance of understanding how the business operates, learning the numbers. That is, I think every business owner starts looking at cash flow, right? If I got enough cash in the bank to make payroll, I'm doing good. If it starts to go down, I got problems. Start there, but then add on to it. Okay, what's the next key performance metric I can look at? What's the next one that I can look at? But all that again comes back to knowing your business and knowing what makes it profitable, what makes it run. And again, doesn't have to be you that figures that out. There's folks out there like ourselves and lots of other good service providers who can help you, go through that process and figure out how to grow your business to the point that you want to get it to. Because ultimately, it's been done before. It's been done by somebody else, right? So you just need to find the path that they used and save yourself some time and headaches on trying things that haven't worked in the past.
Well, on that note, I would encourage everyone, if they aren't aware, if they have questions for Bryan, to reach out on LinkedIn. Check out Wipfli on LinkedIn, and it's wipfli.com or
Yep, Wipfli.com. We've got a lot of different resources on the website. Particularly you can kind of drill down by industry. So if you get into our manufacturing, so you'll see a lot of. We have, gosh, Jimmy, I could probably take up another hour telling you about all the different things we do for companies. But within our industry sections, we've really tried to group it the way that business owners would think about it, right? Hey, I've got a human resource challenge, or I've got a data and analytics challenge, whatever. So, that's probably the best way. I'd encourage people to look at our site and try and see if there's anything we can help. And yeah, I'm always happy to speak to to owners and leadership teams. And so, yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. You can connect with me through the Wipfli website. Happy to talk. And I don't know. I just love hearing about what business owners are doing and what they're trying to do and how they're trying to get there. And it just makes me be a better advisor for my clients because I hear more, I see more, and I have more opportunity to do that. So.
Well, Bryan, I really appreciate it. If anybody has questions out there for Bryan or for us or comments on the podcast or if you want to join or whatever, manufacturing-matters.com. And again, Bryan, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
No, Jimmy, thank you for bringing me on. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Thank you.